Jambo, welcome to this episode where I will be diving into a short history of Kenya. Kenya has a deep history. A part of Eastern Africa. Kenya has seen early human habitation by the Bantu, Nilets, and Cushitic linguistic groups. The Bantu speakers, the largest group, include the Kikuyu, Luhya, Kamba, Kisii, Meru, and Mijikenda. The Nilotic groups encompass the Luo, Kalenjin, Maasai, Samburu, and Turkana. Cushitic speakers include the Somali, Rendille, Borana, and others. Archaeological findings have shown that by 300 AD, Bantu-speaking communities were present at the coastal areas of Kwale in Kenya. Swahili, a Bantu language with many Arabic words, developed as a trade language between the different peoples. Swahili culture developed in the towns, notably in Lamu, Malindi, and Mombasa. The Swahili culture developed its own written language. The language incorporated elements from different civilizations, with Arabic as its strongest quality. Some Arab settlers were rich merchants who, because of their wealth, gained power as rulers of coastal cities. The Swahili coast was historically known as Azania in the Greco-Roman era and as Zanj or Zinj in Middle Eastern, Chinese and Indian literature from the 7th to the 14th century. Historians estimate that in the 15th century, southern Luo speakers started migrating to western Kenya. The Luo descend from migrants closely related to other Nilotic Luo peoples, especially the Acholi and Padhola people, who moved from South Sudan through Uganda into western Kenya. The walled settlement of Thimlik Oginga is the largest and best preserved of 138 sites containing 521 stone structures that were built around the Lake Victoria region in Nyanza province. Carbon dating and linguistic evidence suggest that the site is at least 550 years old. The Portuguese became the first Europeans to explore the region of current-day Kenya. Vasco da Gama visited Mombasa in April 1498. The Portuguese presence in East Africa served the purpose of controlling trade within the Indian Ocean and securing the sea routes linking Europe and Asia. The construction of Fort Jesus in Mombasa in 1593 aimed to solidify the Portuguese in the region. The Omani Arabs posed the most direct challenge to Portuguese influence in East Africa, besieging Portuguese fortresses. By 1730 the Omanis had expelled the remaining Portuguese from the coasts of present-day Kenya and Tanzania. Slave trade at the Swahili coast dated as far back as the 17th century. Traders exchanged guns and cloth in exchange for enslaved prisoners of war. Slave trade formed part of the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade, which wasn't abolished until the early 1800s. Slave caravan routes into the interior of Kenya reached as far as the foothills of Mount Kenya, Lake Victoria and past Lake Baringo into Samburu country. Arab governance of all the major ports along the East African coast continued until British started its interest in the region and sought to end slavery. The first Christian mission was founded on 25 August 1846, by Dr. Johann Ludwig Krapf, a German sponsored by Anglican Church Missionary Society of England. He established a station among the Mijikenda at Rabai on the coast. He later translated the Bible into Swahili. Many freed slaves rescued by the British Navy were settled there. However, Krapf had more to his history as Chief Kivoi, Kamba's long-distance trader born in the 1780s, Wild Drive. Krapf was a missionary of the Anglican Church Missionary Society. Kivoi helped Krapf and his friend Johannes Rebmann to be the first white persons to see Mount Kenya on December 3, 1849. Unfortunately, Chief Kivoi died while on an expedition in Tana River with Dr. Krapf. According to a diary by Dr. Johann Ludwig Krapf, said their caravan was attacked and dispersed within minutes by robbers near Yatta. Krapf notes that he miraculously survived, but Kivoi was killed alongside his immediate associates. When the Akamba in Kitui, Chief Kivoi's homeland, got information of their chief's demise, they accused Krapf of the murder. They condemned him to die and Dr. Krapf was forced to flee towards Yatta due to fear of revenge from Kivoi's followers. Kamba people were mad at Krapf for allegedly killing Kivoi, a man who had guided the Kamba from Mombasa to the Kenyan interior Ukambani. By 1850, European explorers had begun mapping the interior of Africa. At the Berlin Conference of 1884–1885, 14 European countries participated in dividing up the African continent for colonial control. In 1885, European leaders met at the infamous Berlin Conference to divide Africa and arbitrarily draw up borders that exist to this day. The meeting on how Africa was to be subdivided had no single African representation in the Round Table discussion. By 1914, almost 90% of Africa was colonized. Ethiopia and Liberia are widely believed to be the only two African countries to have never been colonized. In 1895, the British government took over the Kenyan coast and claimed the interior as far west as Lake Naivasha. It set up the East Africa Protectorate. The border was extended to Uganda in 1902. Key to the development of Kenya's interior was the construction of a railway from Mombasa to Kisumu ending in 1901. This was to be the first piece of railway in Kenya. In building the railway, the British had to confront strong local opposition, especially from Koitalel Arap Samoei, a diviner and Nandi leader who prophesied that a black snake would tear through Nandi land spitting fire, which was seen later as the railway line. For 10 years he fought against the builders of the railway line and train. As governor of Kenya, Sir Percy Girouard was instrumental in initiating railway extension policy that led to construction of the Nairobi-Thika and Konza-Magadi railways. Some 32,000 workers were imported from British India to do the manual labor. Many Indians stayed in Kenya after the end of the railway, as did most of the Indian traders and small businessmen who saw opportunity in the opening up of the interior of Kenya. According to one account, nearly all major Kenyan towns except Kisumu were originally founded by Indian traders. Kenya became a military base for the British in the First World War 1914–1918 as efforts to subdue the German colony. In the Second World War 1939–1945, Kenya became an important British military base for successful campaigns against Italy in the Italian Somaliland and Ethiopia. The war brought money and an opportunity for military service for 98,000 men, called askaris. The war stimulated African nationalism. After the war, African ex-servicemen sought to maintain the socio-economic gains they had accrued through service in the King's African Rifles Army. The first stirrings of modern African political organization in Kenya colony sought to protest pro-settler policies, increased taxes on Africans and the despised kipand identifying metal band worn around the neck. Harry Thuku formed the Young Kikuyu Association (YKA) and started a publication called Tangazo. In the mid-1920s, the Kikuyu Central Association (KCA) was formed. Led by Joseph Kenyatta and Jesse Kariuki, it picked up from Harry Thuku's East African Association except that it represented the Kikuyu almost exclusively. Jomo Kenyatta was the secretary and editor of the association's publication Mugwithania. The KCA focused on unifying the Kikuyu into one geographic policy. During the early part of the 20th century, the interior central highlands of Kenya were settled by British farmers. Approximately 15,000 white settlers lived in the area. Kenya became a focus of resettlement of young, upper-class British officers. White settlers could get a free 1,000 acres. The goal of the government was to speed up modernization and economic growth. Things changed from 1952 during the Mau Mau Uprising, an armed local movement directed principally against the colonial government and the European settlers. Key leaders of KAU known as the Kapenguria Six were arrested. They include Jomo Kenyatta, Paul Ngai, Kungu Karumba, Bildad Kajia, Fred Kubai and Akieng Oniko. Jomo Kenyatta denied he was a leader of the Mau Mau but was convicted at trial and was sent to prison in 1953. The Mau Mau Uprising set in play a series of events that expedited the road to Kenya's independence. After the suppression of the Mau Mau Rising, the British provided for the election of the 6 African members to the Legislative Council. Tom Mboya, Daniel Arap Moi and Oginga Odinga also taking leadership positions. The new colonial constitution of 1958 increased African representation. Oginga Odinga called for the release of Jomo Kenyatta, and 2 years later Kenyatta got freedom in 1961. Kenya achieved internal self-government with open elections held in May 1963. Jomo Kenyatta as its first president. That's the end of part 1 of Kenya history. Please follow and subscribe for more history of the African continent. Thanks for watching. This is Sport Flight TV.